You all are free now.
The valley near Copper Ridge, Wyoming, was remote and beautiful, surrounded by mountains that rose like sentinels above the grassland. Thomas Ashford had chosen this location for his ranch precisely because of its isolation. He wanted solitude, distance from civilization, and land where he could build something meaningful away from the complications of society. In the spring of 1891, Thomas was riding the eastern boundary of his property when he noticed something that didn't belong. Fresh wagon tracks leading to a barn that stood abandoned on a section of land he rarely visited. The barn had been there for years, a relic from an earlier homestead attempt. Thomas had no reason to go near it, but curiosity and something deeper, an instinct about wrongness, compelled him to investigate. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. The barn door was secured with a chain and heavy padlock. Thomas could hear sound from inside, faint sounds that made his blood run cold. He broke the lock with an axe, swinging the barn door open to reveal a scene of such profound horror that for a moment he couldn't process what he was seeing. 12 women, chained to posts driven into the ground, some lying on filthy straw, some sitting with their heads bowed, all of them thin, malnourished, and clearly terrified by the sudden appearance of a stranger. Thomas's first instinct was to free them immediately, but he forced himself to think strategically. Whoever had enslaved these women would return eventually. Whoever had enslaved these women was organized and dangerous. If Thomas freed them without a plan, the enslavers could simply recapture them. Instead, he slowly approached the closest woman, a young Latina with haunted eyes who flinched at his movement. "I'm not here to hurt you," Thomas said, his voice low and steady. "I own this land. I'm going to help you. But I need you to trust me, and I need you to help me understand what's happening here." Over the next several hours, as Thomas carefully removed the chains and provided water and food from his supplies, the women's stories emerged. They had been trafficked from Mexico, promised work in American households. Instead, they had been brought to this remote location and held in slavery. They were forced to work, some in fields, some in forced sexual servitude, with no wages, no freedom, and no hope of escape. The man responsible was a wealthy businessman named Marcus Caldwell, who ran a trafficking operation that spanned 3 states. He used remote locations like this barn as holding centers for women before they were sold or moved to other locations. The women had been here for anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months. One of the women, a girl named Rosa who was only 16, had been brutalized and was seriously ill. Another woman named Isabel was pregnant and terrified that her child would be born into captivity. Thomas immediately transported the women to his ranch house, setting up every available room as shelter. He sent a rider to the nearest town to fetch a doctor, claiming that workers on his ranch had fallen ill. He provided the women with clean clothes, hot food, and, most importantly, information about their rights and options. "You're not bound to anyone now," Thomas told them as they sat together in his main hall. "You're free. The choice of what happens next is yours. I can help you return to your families in Mexico if that's what you want. I can help you stay in Wyoming and build new lives. I can help you testify against the men who enslaved you. Whatever you choose, I'll support it." But Thomas knew that support wasn't enough. Justice required action. He contacted federal authorities and provided them with detailed information about Marcus Caldwell's operation. He worked with investigators to identify other locations where women were being held. And he made a decision that would put his own life at risk. He would help bring down the entire trafficking network. Over the following months, with the women safe at his ranch, Thomas worked with federal agents to gather evidence. He documented everything: the barn, the chains, the conditions, the names the women could provide of other enslaved women, and other locations. He hired lawyers to help the women understand their legal rights and options. And when the moment came to testify against Marcus Caldwell, Thomas stood in a courtroom and told the truth about what he had found, knowing full well that Caldwell had powerful connections and that his testimony would make him a target. Caldwell was convicted of human trafficking, forced labor, and sexual assault. Several of his associates were also arrested. Other trafficking locations were raided, and women were freed. It was a significant blow to a network that had operated with near impunity for years. But the legal victory, while important, was only part of the story. The real transformation happened at Thomas's ranch, where the women he had freed began to rebuild their lives. Isabel gave birth to a healthy daughter and chose to stay in Wyoming, eventually finding work as a seamstress and building a quiet, peaceful life. Rosa recovered from her trauma and decided to pursue education, determined to become a teacher, so she could help other vulnerable young people. The other women made their own choices. Some returned to their families in Mexico with money Thomas provided to help them restart. Others stayed and built new lives in America, becoming part of the Wyoming community. What emerged was something remarkable, a community of survivors who became advocates for other survivors. The women Thomas had freed began to help identify other trafficking victims. They worked with authorities to gather information. They supported new survivors as they arrived at Thomas's ranch. And Thomas, who had never intended to become an advocate for trafficking victims, found that his purpose had fundamentally shifted. His ranch became a sanctuary for women escaping slavery and trafficking. He established a formal program, working with federal authorities and local communities to identify and support survivors. One of the women he had freed, a woman named Sophia, became his closest partner in this work. Sophia had been enslaved for 6 months before Thomas found her. She had suffered brutalization and psychological trauma that seemed unsurvivable, but over time, with support and safety, Sophia had healed enough to become a powerful advocate. Years later, as Thomas and Sophia worked together to help a new group of freed women, Sophia spoke about what his intervention had meant. "When I was in that barn," Sophia told a group of newly freed women, "I believed I would die there. I believed slavery was my permanent fate. I believed that no one in the world cared whether I lived or died. Then this man found us, and he did something that seemed impossible. He treated us like human beings, not like victims, not like problems to be solved, like human beings worthy of dignity and respect and freedom." She paused, and her voice grew stronger. That belief that we were worth saving, worth helping, worth believing in, that's what saved our lives. Not just physically, but spiritually. It reminded us that we had value, that we deserved better, that freedom was possible. Over the years, Thomas and Sophia's relationship evolved beyond partnership into something deeper. When Sophia was ready, when she had fully healed and was certain of her own agency, she asked Thomas if he would consider marriage. "I want you to know that I'm choosing this," Sophia told him, "not out of gratitude or obligation, not because I owe you anything, but because I love you and because I want to build a life with you based on mutual respect and genuine partnership." They were married in a ceremony attended by many of the women Thomas had freed, women who had become the community that supported his work and his life. By the time Thomas died at 82, his ranch had become known throughout the West as a sanctuary for trafficking survivors. Hundreds of women had passed through his doors, and thousands more had benefited from the advocacy and support systems he had helped establish. But the story that people always returned to was the day he found 12 women chained in a barn. The moment when one man's decision to investigate his instinct about wrongness had set off a chain of events that would eventually help thousands of other women escape slavery. Years after Thomas's death, the barn where those women had been held was preserved as a historical site and memorial. A plaque at its entrance read, "On this site, 12 enslaved women were freed by a man who believed that everyone deserved dignity and freedom. Their liberation sparked a movement that would help thousands of others escape trafficking and reclaim their lives." And in a small cemetery near the ranch, Thomas's grave was marked with a stone that contained only one inscription: "He saw what others missed and acted when others looked away. In doing so, he changed the world." It was perhaps the truest epitaph a person could receive, not for who he was, but for what his choices had made possible.